Imagine being dropped into a world where money simply doesn't exist, where there are no prices, no banks, no wages, and no official way to measure value, and yet you still need to make choices, trade resources, and somehow organize daily life with thousands of other people who all want different things. That wasn't a thought experiment. It actually happened during World War II inside prisoner of war camps, where soldiers from different countries were confined together, cut off from normal markets, and forced to rely on whatever limited supplies arrived from the outside world. At first, the system seemed simple and controlled, because everyone received roughly the same rations, usually through Red Cross packages that included basic food items like canned meat, chocolate, sugar, and occasionally small luxuries, which meant survival didn't immediately require trade. But that illusion didn't last very long, because the moment people started expressing preferences, the moment one person valued chocolate more than meat or coffee more than sugar, exchange began to appear, not because anyone designed a market, but because human behavior naturally creates one. And slowly, without any formal rules, prisoners began trading: chocolate for bread, coffee for sugar, soap for something slightly better to eat. At this stage, the system was pure barter. And while barter works in simple cases, it quickly breaks down when you need flexibility, because it depends on both people wanting exactly what the other has at the same time, which is something that rarely happens in a crowded and resource-limited environment. So the system evolved not through planning, not through authority, but through necessity. Certain goods started to become more important, not because they were essential for survival, but because they were consistently desired, widely accepted, and easy to exchange. And over time, one item began to dominate everything else: cigarettes. Cigarettes had a combination of properties that made them almost perfect as money. They were small and easy to carry. They were divisible, meaning you could trade one or several depending on the situation. They were relatively uniform, so people trusted their consistency. And most importantly, they were always in demand, either because people smoked them or because they knew someone else would accept them later. Even non-smokers began accepting cigarettes in exchange for goods, not because they wanted to use them, but because they trusted the system that was forming around them. And that trust is the exact moment when something stops being just a product and becomes money. Because money is not defined by what it is made of. It is defined by what it can do. Cigarettes became a unit of account, allowing prices to stabilize. So instead of negotiating every trade from scratch, people could say a piece of chocolate costs 5 cigarettes, or a portion of bread costs 3. They became a store of value, something that could be saved and used later, giving people the ability to think beyond immediate survival. And they became a medium of exchange, the common link that made transactions smoother and more efficient. In other words, without any central authority, without any formal economic system, and without any planning, a complete monetary system had emerged. But here's where things get even more interesting, because this system didn't just exist, it behaved like a real economy. The supply of cigarettes depended entirely on external deliveries, especially Red Cross packages, which meant the prisoners had no control over how much money existed in the system. And when a large shipment arrived, something very familiar began to happen. Suddenly, everyone had more cigarettes, spending increased, and prices went up. Inflation. And when deliveries slowed down, cigarettes became scarce. People started saving instead of spending, trade slowed, and prices began to fall. Deflation. At times, prisoners even noticed price differences between different camps, depending on supply conditions, creating something very close to exchange rate differences between separate economies. And in some cases, prisoners began acting like traders, buying goods when prices were low and selling when prices were high, effectively becoming early arbitrageurs inside a prison camp. This wasn't theory. This wasn't a model. This was a real economy, observed and documented by economists like R.A. Radford, who studied how these systems form naturally under extreme conditions. And what it revealed was something deeply uncomfortable. Money does not need a government, it does not need gold, and it does not even need to physically exist in a meaningful way. All it requires is a shared belief that something can be used to exchange value. The prisoners didn't set out to create money. They didn't design a financial system. They simply adapted to their environment, and in doing so, they recreated the fundamental mechanics of modern economies, including pricing, inflation, arbitrage, and market behavior in one of the most constrained environments imaginable. Because in the end, money is not something that is imposed from above. It is something that emerges from below whenever people need to exchange value. And once that system forms, it starts to follow its own logic, even in a prison camp. If this gave you a new perspective, consider subscribing to Capital Historian, because every video here is about understanding the hidden systems that shape how money, power, and history actually work. And if you liked this video, smash that like button. And if you didn't like it, that's fine too. Hit dislike. It still helps the algorithm more than doing nothing. Because at the end of the day, attention is a currency too.